Who is this nation? Well, you won't find their name on any map, but they boast a population of over 1.3 billion people. They possess some of the world's greatest mineral resources, and yet their people are among the world's poorest. They have been around for 1,400 years, but they've never learned how to transfer power from one generation to the next. They're deeply religious, and yet their scriptures declare that salvation from their sins is impossible, that good works do no good, and that God is not interested in their welfare, and that the very best thing they can do in this life is to get themselves killed fighting against anyone who does not agree with their founder. This nation calls itself Dar al-Islam, the House of Islam. It is comprised of every Muslim-controlled state in the world, and our analysis of Ezekiel's prophecy has just taken a look at most of them. As evil as they were, the old Soviet Union kept a lid on the insanity of the Muslim component in their southern territory for 70 years during the 20th century. But now the lid is off and the pot is on full boil. Suddenly Ezekiel 38 and 39 make perfect sense. The motive for God's attack is religious hatred, pure and simple. Muhammad told his followers to wipe the infidels out to the last and to kill every Jew who falls under your control. The people of Magog and their allies are following their prophet's orders. The only surprise is that we are surprised about this. So who is Magog exactly? Well, let's see. Who has borders compatible with the Scythians, with a capital city within 20 miles of the Caspian Sea? Who is wealthy enough to single-handedly equip a modern multinational army, is influential enough to lead like-minded countries into battle, and has proven its willingness to defy international law? Whose land is floating on an ocean of oil, yet is spending vast sums of money building nuclear power plants to produce their electricity, power plants whose byproducts have no purpose except for the manufacture of atomic weapons? Who is the only Middle Eastern nation, at the moment, ruled not by a secular government of some sort, but by fundamentalist clerics of Islam, the fastest-growing, most aggressive religion in the world? Who carries the spiritual torch of this militant doctrine whose founder commanded his followers to kill every Jew they could? The answer is pretty obvious, at least to me. Magog is Iran. Consider this passage from Isaiah. It's one of the few in which the noble prophet seems genuinely terrified at what he's seen.
The burden against the wilderness of the sea.
That this is the Caspian Sea will become clear in a moment.
As whirlwinds in the south pass through, so it comes from the desert, from a terrible land. A distressing vision is declared to me. The treacherous dealer deals treacherously, and the plunderer plunders. Go up, O Elam, besiege, O Media, all its sign I have made to cease. Therefore my loins are filled with pain. Pangs have taken hold of me, like the pangs of a woman in labor. I was distressed when I heard it. I was dismayed when I saw it. My heart wavered. Fearfulness frightened me. The night for which I longed, he turned into fear for me. Prepare the table, set a watchman in the tower, eat and drink. Arise, you princes, anoint the shield. Isaiah 21, 1-5.
Because this is the passage where Isaiah later relates that the watchman reports, Babylon has fallen, has fallen. Everyone naturally assumes it's all about Babylon. But it's not. Not about historical Babylon, anyway. At its height, Babylon controlled most of Elam, which is Susiana, but it never controlled Media. Where are these nations? Elam and its northern neighbor Media straddled the territory between the Persian Gulf and the Caspian Sea. The prophet has defined modern-day Iran. Persia, by the way, was Elam's neighbor to the east and south. Israel is admonished to get up and oil its shield, that is, prepare its defenses. Of course, she's just put her defense in the hands of the Antichrist's UN peacekeepers when this happens. The timing couldn't be worse. On the other hand, it's this very surrender of Israel's military sovereignty that's driving the timing. It's the heart of Gog's battle strategy. As we shall see, Israel will rise to the challenge anyway. And what was that about Babylon? When John heard the angel use exactly the same phrase, Babylon is fallen, in Revelation 14 verse 8, it was no coincidence. The angel was referring to the same event Isaiah had, the final downfall of the world's system of false worship. The event that triggers Babylon's impending demise is the invasion of Israel by Elam and Media, a.k.a. Magog, a.k.a. Iran. At the time of this writing, Iran is the only nation within Dar al-Islam whose leaders consider the Muslim scriptures their primary law. The wisdom-impaired American politicians, however, are doing everything possible to turn Iraq, Iran's western neighbor, into an Islamic fundamentalist state. Don't get me started. The inspired Islamic scriptures, I put inspired in quotes, consist principally of 4 ancient works: the Quran, supposedly the very word of Allah; the Hadith, or sayings of the Prophet, recorded by al-Bukhari, supported by the Hadith of Imam Muslim, though it runs a distant second in credibility; and the biographies, or Sunnah, that is, example, of the Prophet Muhammad. The earliest of these was written by Ibn Ishaq, of which only the version edited many years later by Ibn Hisham survives. A later biography by al-Tabari borrows heavily from Ibn Ishaq. It's particularly valuable because it retains much of what Ibn Hisham edited out. The Hadith and Sunnah are essential to Islam because the Quran is incomprehensible without the background, commentary, and timeline they provide. In fact, Islamic law has no basis in the Quran without the support it derives from Muhammad's recorded words and deeds. Now, take a closer look at the opening verse of the account of this future war.
The word of Yahweh came to me, saying, Son of man, set your face against Gog, of the land of Magog, and say, Thus says Yahweh, Behold, I am against you, O Gog. Ezekiel 38:1.
God tells the prophet that he is against the leader, Gog, not merely his nation. Political leaders, good and bad, from Nimrod to Caesar, are mentioned in their historical context throughout the Bible, but the only ones taken to task are the ones who purposely attempt to lead people away from God's truth. For example, Balak, Jeroboam, Ahab, etc. We are admonished to obey the other leaders, even the less than perfect ones, observing the laws of the land and paying our taxes to them. That means that Gog is more than just another dictator out to line his own pockets, like Saddam Hussein was. He is deliberately keeping his people in spiritual bondage, enforcing with the machine of government his own religious views and convictions. Could there be a better description of the man who bears the title of Ayatollah? And what about Russia? Am I saying Russia won't be a part of this? Actually, I'm not. I believe, for reasons I'll explain in another chapter, that they will be dragged into the fray, as will America. But they won't be the instigators. They aren't Magog, and Russia's leader, communist or not, is not Gog. The Russians will merely be protecting their own interests. After all, the Muslim nations are their biggest trading partners, their primary source of hard currency. But Russia isn't going to unilaterally attack Israel any more than the tail of an undisciplined dog will chase a car down the street. They may come along for the ride, but the driving force in this insane war of Gog and Magog, World War III, will be Islam. You've probably noticed my annoying tendency to take potshots at Islam every few pages. Please forgive me. I can't help myself. You see, on September 11th, 2001, as the rest of the country watched in horror as the hijacked airliners plunged into the World Trade Center and the Pentagon, Craig Wynn and I were finishing up the production details on our first book. As the first reports of Al-Qaeda's role came trickling in, Craig told me sadly, "I know exactly what's going to happen here. Our reaction is going to be all wrong. We'll send troops into harm's way, fire off a bunch of cruise missiles, and blow up some mud huts. But going after Al-Qaeda will be attacking symptoms, not causes. I'll bet you the real problem has something to do with Islam. These terrorists have somehow twisted their religion and made it violent." Craig was right that day, and wrong. Yes, America pursued only the symptom, Al-Qaeda. We went hunting for Osama bin Laden, blindly refusing to consider any deeper cause, even though Osama himself told us plainly what his motivation was. When we discovered that the Taliban in Afghanistan had harbored this terrorist club while dragging the country back to the 7th century, we set out on a crusade to right a wrong, one that had absolutely nothing to do with 9/11. But when Craig went looking for the root causes of Muslim violence, he discovered that the problem wasn't in Islam. The problem was Islam. The terrorists hadn't twisted Islam to their own purposes. They were merely doing what their holy books commanded them to do. Why don't more Christians do that? As Wynn began to analyze the Muslim scriptures, he realized that the life and words of Muhammad were a recipe for terror. The closer you modeled your life on Muhammad, the more you'd look like Osama bin Laden. The research resulted in our second book together, this time a novel, easier to assimilate than nonfiction, entitled Tea with Terrorists, published by Cricket Song Books in 2002. Real Islam is totally unlike the picture our politicians and the media have been painting for the last 40 years. But incredibly, because Muslims don't study their own scriptures, they're actually instructed not to, the majority of them don't understand it either. They just do and think what their imams tell them. After all, Islam means submit. Wynn and I discovered that the gap between truth and perception was truly cavernous, especially here in America. Once again, we as a nation had proven ourselves willingly ignorant of something that could kill us. Because it's been said so often, most Americans believe that Islam is a peaceful religion. It is not, at least not as any non-Muslim would describe peace. The Islamic scriptures define peace as the state of affairs that will exist only when the entire world submits to Allah and His Messenger and pays taxes to them. In reality, Islam is peaceful only insofar as its practitioners ignore or deny the teaching and example of its founder, Muhammad. But even then, the definition is deceptive, for those Muslims who refuse to fight in Allah's cause with full force and weaponry are labeled by their own scriptures as hypocrites, for whom are reserved the hell fire. They're not Muslims. In fact, from its beginning, Islam has been far less a religion than a political doctrine designed to enrich and satiate the carnal cravings of its founder and his followers. The religious part, the 5 pillars of Islam, aren't even specified in the Quran, the collective revelation supposedly handed down from Allah. The pillars have to be gleaned from the Hadith. Muhammad invented, or more correctly adopted from earlier local pagan custom, these rites and rituals for one purpose only, to keep his followers in a posture and mindset of blind, unthinking obedience. The very word Islam means submission. And who is Allah? Many Christians, duped by a gullible press, who have in turn been duped by Muslim propagandists, have imagined that Allah is the Arabic word for God, which makes him the same as Yahweh, the Judeo-Christian deity. Our pundits and politicians, right up to the President of the United States, insist that we all worship the same God. Nothing could be further from the truth. When the Quran says, "There is no God but God," it uses 2 different words. It says, "There is no ilah but Allah."